Deauville, Normandy, August 14, 1944. In an attic above a shuttered bakery, a young woman named Élise kneels beside a loose floorboard and lifts out a canvas-wrapped bundle. Inside is a pistol unlike any she has seen, barely 30 centimeters long, its barrel swollen and strange, its grip worn smooth by a stranger's hand. She does not know his name. She knows only that he arrived by parachute 6 weeks earlier, that he taught her how to strip the weapon in under a minute in total darkness, and that he left before dawn one morning and never came back for it. Tucked inside the wrapping is a folded letter, its ink faded to the color of weak tea, addressed to no one in particular. She reads it once, rewraps the bundle, and hides it again. It will not surface for another 80 years. In November of last year, workmen clearing that same attic for renovation found the bundle exactly where Élise had left it. The letter, remarkably, was still legible. It was written by a British Special Operations executive agent, and in careful, unhurried handwriting it described a weapon that its makers had never officially named in public and that most of the men who carried it were forbidden, on pain of court-martial, from ever discussing. The letter spoke of a pistol built for one purpose only: to kill without waking the house next door. That weapon was the Welrod, and the story behind it is one of the strangest and most quietly devastating chapters of the Second World War. To understand why such a thing needed to exist, you have to understand the shape of the war that Britain found itself fighting after the fall of France in June 1940. Conventional forces had been swept from the continent. What remained was a network of scattered agents, saboteurs, and local resistance fighters operating in constant proximity to the enemy, often inside occupied towns and cities where a single gunshot could bring an entire street of German soldiers running within seconds. A standard service pistol, loud and unmistakable, was almost useless in this environment. Firing one in a farmhouse kitchen or a Parisian stairwell was as good as announcing your own arrest. The problem was not killing the enemy. Resistance groups and undercover operatives had opportunities to do that constantly. The problem was killing quietly enough to walk away afterwards. Existing suppressed weapons of the period offered only partial answers. Adapted revolvers and semi-automatics fitted with awkward bolt-on silencers reduced the bang but rarely eliminated it. And the mechanical action of a self-loading pistol, the clack of the slide cycling, was itself a giveaway in a silent room. Some designs whistled. Others were so unreliable that agents distrusted them more than they distrusted noise itself. The Special Operations Executive, formed in July 1940 with Winston Churchill's now famous instruction to set Europe ablaze, needed something categorically different, a weapon that could be produced quickly, concealed easily, and fired at close range without alerting anyone more than a few meters away. It needed to look, to an untrained eye, like nothing more than a length of pipe. That weapon was developed at the Inter-Services Research Bureau's design station at Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire, a quiet commuter town that, unknown to its residents, housed one of the most inventive small arms workshops in Britain. The name Welrod is itself a fusion of Welwyn and rod, a nod to its unassuming tube-like silhouette. Design work began around 1942 under engineers who approached the problem less like traditional gunsmiths and more like industrial designers solving a very specific brief: minimum sound, minimum size, maximum discretion. The result was a bolt-action pistol, not a self-loading one. And that choice was the heart of its genius. By removing the semi-automatic mechanism entirely and replacing it with a manually operated bolt, similar in principle to a rifle's, the designers eliminated the mechanical clatter that gave away suppressed automatics. After firing, the user twisted and drew back the knurled section at the rear of the weapon to eject the spent case and chamber a fresh round, all in near silence, all by hand. The integral suppressor was not an attachment, but part of the weapon's fundamental architecture, running almost the full length of the barrel and packed with expanding rubber baffles that a fired bullet would punch through, trapping and dispersing the propellant gases before they escaped. The magazine, holding either 6 or 8 rounds depending on the variant, doubled as the pistol grip, so that when it was removed the entire weapon could be mistaken for a torch, a bicycle pump, or an oddly shaped metal tube discarded in a drawer. The results were extraordinary for the period. Tests suggested the Welrod, fired with standard subsonic .32 or 9 mm ammunition, produced a report barely louder than a hand clap at a few paces, and considerably quieter at any distance beyond that. Imagine standing in a small room and softly clapping your hands once. That is roughly the acoustic signature agents were working with, compared to the sharp crack of an ordinary pistol, which can be heard clearly through walls and across streets. The weapon weighed under a kilogram unloaded and measured roughly 31 centimeters from muzzle to base, small enough to slip into a coat pocket, a handbag, or, as Élise discovered, beneath a floorboard. Production numbers remain frustratingly uncertain, a consequence of the secrecy that surrounded the entire program. Historians generally estimate that somewhere between 2,800 and 14,000 units were manufactured across the war and its immediate aftermath, a range so wide it tells you as much about the quality of wartime record-keeping as it does about the weapon itself. Manufacture is believed to have taken place partly at the Bureau's own workshops and partly through subcontracted engineering firms briefed only on isolated components, so that no single factory floor ever saw the complete picture of what it was building. This compartmentalized approach to production, common across special operations executive equipment, meant that even now, researchers piecing together the Welrod's manufacturing history are working from fragments rather than a single ledger. Deployment stories are, by their nature, sparse and difficult to verify, because the entire purpose of the weapon was to leave no trace and no witnesses. What evidence survives suggests use across occupied France, Norway, and later in Malaya and other theaters where irregular warfare persisted after 1945. Resistance networks in France, operating alongside SOE liaison officers, are believed to have used the Welrod for close-range assassinations of collaborators and German officers in circumstances where a firearms report would have been fatal to the operation itself, not just the target. Norwegian resistance fighters, working in the tight quarters of coastal towns under constant German naval patrol, are similarly recorded in fragmentary post-war testimony as having valued a weapon that could be fired inside a building without bringing a patrol through the door 30 seconds later. The psychological effect on occupying forces, where it can be inferred at all, seems to have been less about any single killing and more about the creeping uncertainty it created. A collaborator who dies without a shot being heard is a death that cannot easily be explained, investigated, or deterred. That uncertainty, historians argue, was worth more to the resistance than the weapon's modest kill count alone would suggest. If you're finding this interesting so far, a quick subscribe genuinely helps more than you'd think and costs nothing. Germany fielded its own suppressed sidearms during the same period, most notably variants of the Sauer 38H and modified Luger designs fitted with detachable suppressors, but these remained fundamentally self-loading pistols with bolt-on silencing devices rather than purpose-built silent weapons. They were quieter than a standard pistol, but never approached the Welrod's near silence, and their semi-automatic action still produced the mechanical noise the British design had specifically engineered away. American efforts ran along a more parallel track. The Office of Strategic Services commissioned the high-standard HDM, a suppressed .22 caliber pistol that, unlike the Welrod, retained a semi-automatic action, trading some silence for faster follow-up shots. It was an excellent weapon in its own right and saw genuine use with American operatives and, notably, with some SOE-trained personnel who preferred its slightly greater rate of fire, but independent assessments of the period generally regarded the Welrod as the quieter of the two, precisely because of that bolt-action decision made at Welwyn. The trade-off was speed for silence, and in the specific, intimate scenarios these weapons were built for, usually a single shot at a range of a few meters, silence mattered more than a second round. The Welrod's influence did not end with the war. Its bolt-action, integrally suppressed philosophy quietly shaped later generations of covert firearms, and variants and conceptual descendants are understood to have remained in limited service or storage with British Special Forces for decades afterwards, with some sources suggesting use as late as the Falklands conflict in 1982, though official confirmation of specific deployments remains characteristically absent from public record. Surviving examples today can be found in the collections of the Imperial War Museum in London and in smaller regimental and intelligence-related museum collections, presented now not as active tools but as artifacts of a particular kind of warfare that depended as much on absence, the absence of noise, of evidence, of witnesses, as it did on any conventional measure of firepower. What the Welrod achieved cannot be measured in the way a tank's kill count or a bomber's tonnage can be measured. Its true impact lived in the negative space of the war, the assassinations that were never traced, the collaborators whose deaths never triggered a manhunt, the patrols that never came because no one heard anything to bring them. Historians are careful, and rightly so, to note that we will likely never know the true number of lives the Welrod took, nor the true weight of the fear it sowed among those who suspected, correctly, that a length of metal pipe left in the wrong drawer might be the last thing they ever saw. What can be said with confidence is narrower and, in its way, more remarkable. That a design team in a Hertfordshire garden town solved, with a bolt, a rubber baffle, and a magazine shaped like a handle, a problem that had defeated every conventional gunsmith who had tried to muffle a self-loading pistol before them. Élise, whoever she truly was, never wrote her own account. We know her only through the unnamed agent's letter, and even that letter raises more questions than it answers. Who was he? Did he survive the war? Did he ever wonder, in the decades afterwards, what became of the pistol he left behind a floorboard in a Normandy attic? We do not know, and in a story built entirely around the value of not knowing, around silence as a weapon in itself, perhaps that gap in the record is fitting rather than frustrating. 80 years is a long time for a secret to keep itself. Paint fades, buildings change hands, memories die with the people who carried them, and yet somehow this one small object wrapped in canvas beneath a Normandy floorboard waited undisturbed through 8 decades of renovation, war, peace, and forgetting, until a workman's crowbar found it by accident rather than design. The Welrod was built to leave no trace. For 80 years it very nearly succeeded in leaving none at all. There is something almost too neat, too cinematic, about a silent weapon staying silent for 80 years before anyone found it. And yet that is precisely what happened. It was designed to disappear into a drawer, a coat pocket, a pipe rack, and it disappeared instead into an attic, patient and forgotten, for longer than most of the men who carried one lived to see afterwards. The engineers at Welwyn set out to build the quietest weapon of the war. They could not have known they were also building one of its quietest stories, a story that took 80 years and a stranger's crowbar simply to be heard at all. Some weapons are remembered for the noise they made. This one is remembered, if it is remembered at all, for the noise it never made, and that, in the end, may be the more unsettling legacy of the two.